The plane hummed, a low, constant drone. It was the kind of sound that could either lull you to sleep or keep you wide awake, depending on your state of mind. For Max, it was the latter. The hum seemed to amplify his restlessness, a constant reminder of how far he was from the ground and from home. Outside, the sun dipped below the clouds, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The view was breathtaking, a masterpiece of nature that seemed almost surreal. Yet Max barely noticed. His thoughts were elsewhere, tangled in the unease that always accompanied him on flights. Inside, the cabin lights were dim, casting a soft glow over the rows of seats. The atmosphere was calm, almost serene, but it did little to soothe Max's nerves. The quiet hum of the engines was punctuated by the occasional rustle of a blanket, or the faint murmur of a passenger shifting in their seat. Most passengers were asleep, or well, trying to be. Some had their heads tilted awkwardly against the windows, while others were cocooned in blankets. Max, however, couldn't sleep. He never enjoyed flying. The confined space, the turbulence, the feeling of being so far from solid ground, it all made him uneasy. He fidgeted in his seat, shifting from one uncomfortable position to another. His mind wandered to home, to the comfort of his own bed, the familiar creak of the floorboards, and the soft snoring of his dog, Buster. He longed for the sense of security that came with being in a place he knew so well. He glanced at his watch, only 5 hours left in the flight. 5 hours felt like an eternity. Time seemed to stretch and warp at 30,000 feet, each minute dragging on longer than the last. He just had to get through 5 more hours. 5 hours of trying to distract himself, of trying to ignore the nagging thoughts that crept into his mind. He tapped his fingers on the armrest, a small, rhythmic motion that did little to ease his impatience. Closing his eyes, he tried to shut out the nervous chatter in his head. He focused on his breathing, counting each inhale and exhale, hoping it would calm him. But the thoughts persisted, a relentless stream of worries and what-ifs. He pictured his bedroom, his dog Buster asleep at the foot of the bed. The image was comforting, a small anchor in the sea of his anxiety. He could almost hear Buster's soft breathing, feel the warmth of the blankets, and smell the faint scent of lavender from the diffuser on his nightstand. But suddenly, a strange scratching sound broke the silence. Max opened his eyes. He looked around, his heart racing. What was that noise? It was faint, but persistent, like something, or someone, was moving just out of sight. He strained his ears, trying to pinpoint the source, his unease growing with each passing second. The scratching came again, this time louder, from the overhead compartment. It was faint at first, almost like a whisper against the hum of the airplane engines. But now, it was unmistakable. A persistent, eerie sound that seemed to echo through the cabin. People began to stir, murmuring to each other, exchanging nervous glances. The tension in the air was palpable, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. A child clutched their parent's arm, while a flight attendant paused mid-step, her tray trembling slightly. Then it happened. A spider dropped, landing on a sleeping man's newspaper. The man jolted awake, his eyes widening in shock as the creature skittered across the page. Gasps rippled through the cabin, but it wasn't just any spider. This one was huge. Its body was unnervingly large, its presence impossible to ignore. It seemed almost otherworldly, as if it didn't belong in the confined space of the airplane. Its legs, thick and hairy, moved with a deliberate, almost menacing grace. Each step it took seemed to amplify the unease spreading through the cabin. Its eyes, glinting in the dim light, seemed to watch everything, as if it were calculating its next move. The way they reflected the cabin lights made it look even more sinister. The man swatted the paper, but the spider scurried away, disappearing down the aisle. It moved quickly, vanishing into the shadows before anyone could react. The passengers were left frozen, unsure of what to do next.
What the... Did you see that? That thing was massive. It wasn't just fear in the voice, it was disbelief. How could something so large and terrifying be here on this flight?
Screams filled the cabin. Panic spread like wildfire, with passengers scrambling to their feet, their voices rising in alarm. The once calm and orderly flight had descended into chaos as more spiders began to emerge. They seemed to come from everywhere. hidden crevices, overhead compartments, and even the gaps between seats. It was as if the plane itself was infested. They dropped from the overhead compartments, their webs glistening as they descended. Each new spider brought fresh screams and frantic movements from the passengers, crawled out from under seats. The sight of them emerging from the shadows was enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. They moved with an unsettling speed, their legs clicking softly against the floor. They were everywhere, large and menacing, their shiny bodies reflecting the dim cabin lights. It was a nightmare come to life, a scene no one on that flight would ever forget. Chaos erupted. Screams turned to shrieks. People scrambled to their feet, pushing and shoving, desperate to escape the eight-legged invaders. A woman in first class fainted, her shriek echoing through the plane.
"Please remain calm," she yelled, her voice trembling. "Everyone, please stay in your seats."
But her words were lost in the pandemonium. The spiders were everywhere, crawling on seats, walls, even the ceiling. Max felt his heart pounding in his chest. He had never been so scared in his life. He had to get out of there, but where could he go? The plane was 30,000 feet in the air. The spiders weren't just randomly scurrying, they seemed to be organized, almost intelligent. They moved with a purpose, herding the passengers toward the back of the plane, like sheep being herded by a sinister shepherd. One particularly large spider, larger than the rest, positioned itself in the center aisle, blocking the way to the cockpit. It seemed to be the leader. Its multiple eyes glowed with an eerie intelligence.
This isn't normal. What are these things?
Max watched in horror. These weren't ordinary spiders. What were they? And what did they want? He felt a chill run down his spine. This was worse than a nightmare. This was real. The passengers were now huddled in the back of the plane, fear gripping them tightly. Their breaths came in short, panicked gasps, and the air seemed to grow colder with every passing second. The once lively cabin was now a prison, the walls closing in on them as dread took hold. Terror was etched on their faces, their wide eyes darting around the cabin, searching for any sign of hope. But there was none. Every single one of them was frozen in fear, their minds racing with thoughts of escape, yet their bodies unable to move. The spiders had them cornered, their hairy legs and glinting eyes forming an impenetrable barrier. The passengers could feel the vibrations of the spiders' movements, a chilling reminder of their predicament. Their escape route was completely blocked by the eight-legged horde. The spiders seemed to move with purpose, as if they were herding the passengers into submission. The lights flickered for a moment, casting eerie shadows across the cabin. And then darkness. A suffocating, all-encompassing darkness that seemed to amplify every sound, every movement. The cabin was plunged into an eerie blackness. The faint glow of the spider's eyes pierced through the dark, creating an otherworldly, menacing atmosphere.
Oh no, this can't be happening. This has to be a nightmare. Someone, please wake me up.
Screams filled the air, a cacophony of despair and panic. The sound reverberated through the cabin, bouncing off the walls and amplifying the chaos. Echoing through the confined space, the atmosphere grew heavy, thick with fear and the oppressive weight of the unknown. It was as if the very air had turned against them. The stifling stench of spiderwebs filled the cabin, a sickly sweet odor that clung to their senses. It was unbearable, suffocating. Max felt a sticky web brush against his cheek. He shuddered, his body trembling uncontrollably. The sensation was like ice crawling over his skin, leaving him paralyzed with fear.
I can't do this. We're trapped, completely trapped. There's no way out. We're doomed.
He felt helpless, trapped. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, suffocating and inescapable, like there was no way out. The walls seemed to close in, the space shrinking with every passing second. Hope was slipping away, leaving only despair in its wake.
Everyone stay calm, we have a plan.
Suddenly, a voice cut through the darkness. It was the pilot, his voice booming from the intercom. A collective sigh of relief swept through the terrified passengers. Someone was in control.
We're going to attempt an emergency landing, but first we need to get rid of the spiders. We're going to depressurize the cabin. Hopefully it'll suck the creepy crawlies out.
Max clung to a sliver of hope. Could this really work? He wasn't sure, but it was their only chance. He held his breath as the pilot announced the cabin would be depressurized in 5 minutes. The next few minutes were the longest of Max's life. The air grew thin. He felt his ears pop. He could hear the wind howling outside. The plane began to shake violently.
Oh no, this can't be happening.
Then, with a deafening roar, the spiders started getting sucked out of the plane. Their 8 legs clung desperately to anything they could grab. Passengers screamed as the monstrous spiders flew past.
This is insane. Somebody hold on to me.
Max watched in horror as a man near him lost his grip. He was pulled towards the open door. His screams were cut short as he disappeared into the night sky. The plane continued to shake. Max closed his eyes. He couldn't watch anymore. He felt himself being pulled upwards. When he opened his eyes, he saw it, a giant web. The spiders had spun a web strong enough to hold the plane together. He looked towards the cockpit. The giant spider, the leader, was gone. In its place stood a man, dressed in a pilot's uniform. He held a strange device in his hand, glowing with the same eerie light as the spider's eyes. The man smiled, a cold, calculating smile.
It's time you learned the truth. These spiders are under my control and we have a new destination.
Max watched in horror as the man revealed his plan. He was taking them to a secret island, an island where he was breeding an army of giant spiders. Spiders he planned to unleash upon the world.
A secret island? Is this some kind of nightmare?
The plane, caught in the giant web, began to change course, veering sharply away from the safety of the airport. Where were they going? What would happen to them? Max didn't know, but he knew one thing. He had to find a way to stop the man and his army of spiders. The fate of the world depended on it.